receipt of the wood that I got from Hato last week, I decided to take the old Proxxon jointer or surface planer as they refer to it, and certainly start to process the smaller pieces, which are 3 inches, on my little equipment. And I haven't used this in probably over 2 years, and all sorts of stuff started to go wrong. The first issue was that the motor would stick and spin, so it was quite clear something was loose inside. The culprit in terms of the slipping belt was this main pulley, which is held on with a little hex screw that sits right on that flattened area on the shaft, and that had gotten loose. So that was simply a matter of tightening it up. Thank goodness there was no damage to the pulley and no damage to the belt. So that was an easy fix. But of course, to get at that, I had to take the entire thing apart. The second thing I wanted to do is that I haven't changed the blade since I bought the machine. And it didn't take a great deal of sense to say it was overdue to change the blades. In terms of changing the blades, that looked like a fairly easy job when I looked at the manual and saw the diagrams. And what a surprise I was in for. Fortunately for me, the blades have 2 sides that are reversible, so you can simply switch them around and you'd have a fresh set of blades. Normally, when I order a machine like this, I would order replacement parts. But I went and checked, and I have 2 sets of replacement parts for the thickness planer, but not for this beast. And just to clarify, the pointy edge of the blade goes forward, and the sloping edge is close to the hex bolts. And you'll see that in the diagrams that I'm about to show you. So here you can see again I've highlighted the knife or blade in red, and the blue is the plate that pressures the blade and keeps it tight against the main assembly piece. So again, this is just to make sure that we don't flip it around and install it incorrectly. The main problem was that when I lined up the screws to take them out, they were frozen solid inside. So the solution was that I had to take apart the whole machine anyway to find out what was loose inside, and that's what I eventually did. I dismantled the entire thing without changing the adjustment on this slide here. Everything else came apart, and it wasn't that difficult to take it apart. This is the instruction manual, and you can see the 6 screws that hold the knives in place, and there's a little plate that pressures them equally on all 3 sides. And I did everything: more penetrating liquid, applied heat until these got red hot. Then I was using the Allen keys to try and get them out, and I started to get a little movement, and that meant that I'd soon wring the head. Just nothing seemed to work. And of course the screws are so small, you can't put any type of spanner or lock grip on the screw. There's just nothing to hold. So that left me with no option but to put a chisel on it and bang it out. And using that method, I did get all 6 screws off. And that's when the real fun started. So you take out the instructions and you read it, and it's as clear as mud, and it leaves out a lot of important details, the most important of which is what is the height that you set the blade to. I'm sitting here after 4 days of eventually sorting it out. I've looked at least 10 different videos, and of course Proxxon doesn't have a single video on how to set the blade height. So I'm hoping to all those frustrated Proxxon jointer owners that you won't have to go through what I've gone through in the last 5 days. And I have to say that Proxxon's site is useless in telling you how to do this very important thing. The first issue is, having destroyed the bolts, I have no new bolts, and Germany is quite a few thousand miles away. There are none of these bolts available on Amazon, and the US agent for Proxxon hasn't responded to my emails. So that's when I managed to find some Allen screws, which were much taller. I put them on a grinder and continued to grind them, the heads down, so that the heads were low enough that it wouldn't touch the wood coming through. And that took a lot of patience and a good day and a half before I finally got that correct. And then hooked it all back up and started to put some wood on it, and boy was it aggressive. It was eating everything in sight. So that made me go back and take a look at the instruction booklet. It tells you set the receiving table, which is this side, to the maximum planing depth, turning screw 2 in order to optimize the accessibility to the knives here. Then carefully turn the knife shaft 3 into a position where the hexagon screws can be accessed, which they are. Use an Allen key to loosen the 3 screws. Turn the Allen screw 7 as shown in 8C to adjust the position of the knives. And then finally, after successfully adjustment, tighten screw 6 again and repeat the process on the second knife. Of course, that says, don't worry about the height of this, just set it and it will be at the correct height. Now, common sense would tell me that the correct height would be where the blade touches the piece of wood. It should be 0. But in fact, when I set it to 0 and then I went back, I could only get it to cut on the most aggressive cut mark, and that made no sense. So 0, 2, 4, and 6 didn't allow me to cut any of the wood at all. So let me take you through a close-up of what we're actually adjusting when we try to set the blades. You have 2 adjustment screws that set the height of the blade on either end, one on the right and one on the left. To adjust that, you must first slacken these main bolts which hold the assembly in place, and then slowly increase the height until you get both ends exactly the same height. What it doesn't tell you is what height you should raise the blade to. Now, in the book it says it was factory set. Well, it doesn't take a great deal of common sense to realize over time that factory set is going to go askew, and that we need to develop a system that tells us exactly what height this blade should be. I came across an excellent video on YouTube put on by a gentleman called Rob Cosman, a Canadian woodworker, who really has a fantastic series of woodworking videos. And he explains a technique that he learned, and I think if you put that together with what I have here, you'll have absolutely no difficulty in figuring out how to set the height of the knives. What Bob shows is that the blade actually protrudes just slightly above the level of the outfeed, so that it will catch a piece of wood that is placed on top the outfeed tray. And he developed this simple system. And what you do is you put a line on a very flat board, and you move the blade and mark a spot, and where it drops it off is the correct spot. So just to do that again, line up the first mark, which can be anywhere on the flat board, and then you turn the assembly, and when it drops it, That's where the second mark is. Now you come over to the other side and you do the same thing. Line the mark up and turn the blade, and you can see the blade needs to come up, and you just keep gentle pressure on this and it lines up perfectly. Now I know that that blade is parallel, and now you simply tighten up and you do the same thing on the other side. So here we are on the second one, trying to keep my hand out of the way. It's not picking it up, so increase the height some more, and some more. There we go, too much. And that's it, perfect. And now simply again tighten up the other side. Now that space on this board is 3 millimeters in inches 0.124. It's not an exact science, but when I turn that back down now, I'm going to get a nice even cut on the machine. In a number of the videos that I've looked at, that measurement on the board seems to vary, and that's probably because of the size of the planer that they're setting the blades on. This isn't written in stone, so the 3 millimeters is what I've estimate is the correct distance for setting it using this method, but it certainly will be different if the jointer is much bigger. So I am a fan of Proxxon tools. I think for the hobby they make some wonderful tools. They're not inexpensive. But really I find it unacceptable that a company as big as Proxxon wouldn't produce a video on how to set the blades and what the adjustment is. So this is my little contribution to all you Proxxon users, and I hope you haven't had to go through the frustration that I have just had to go through. You can spend an awful lot of time trying to get large bends out of a piece of wood. So I really like to take a straight edge and go on the piece of wood and just do a rough line, and what this particular piece shows is almost a 1/4 inch that needs to come out. So I'm going to go and take this out using a hand plane. With the hand plane, this will take less than 2 or 3 minutes and really save you a lot of time on the jointer itself. One of the limitations of the Proxxon tools, whether it's the thickness planer or the jointer, is that it can only process 3 inches of wood. So these are going to be taken down to my friend Richard Hubbard, who has a much bigger jointer, and we'll clean these pieces up. But quite a few pieces have already been cleaned up using this, and I tend to try and keep all my wood down to 3 inches, simply not to harass my friend Richard very much. Well, that's it for the short video. I hope you found it useful. Those of you who haven't yet changed the blade, I've probably just saved you 4 or 5 days of frustration. And we'll see you in my next video. And remember, you can't keep modeling unless you got plenty of wood all sitting, waiting and dry for you to complete your models. So we'll see you soon.